Good evening all and welcome to our live On Sofa with event. I'm Hannah and I'm the events coordinator for the Supporters Club. Tonight we are joined by our host Vic Morgan and comedian crosstown fan Ivo Graham. A reminder that you can watch our previous live events on our Facebook page and we are still supporting the Prospect Hospice, so please donate if you can. And just a note for our members, please make sure you check your emails as we've sent out voting slips for our Player of the Season awards. Now without further ado, I will bring Vic onto the stream for this evening.
Hello, Hannah. Hiya. Good evening to you. How are you? You okay?
All good here, thank you.
Good, good, good.
And now I will bring Ivo onto the stream. Fingers crossed this all works. Hello, Ivo. We should be able to hear you now.
Hello, Hannah. Vic.
Hiya. Good evening to you. Good.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. So I will now disappear and leave you two to chat, and I'll be back a little bit later on with some of our fan questions.
Lovely. Thank you for facilitating this, Hannah.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. We'll be hearing from Hannah a little bit later on with the questions that you've sent in. So thank you very much indeed for those. Before we get underway, as I always say, this is a very strange time for all of us, but we send our very best wishes to everybody who has suffered throughout this terrible last 3 months, and we wish everybody well and keep safe, everybody. Ivo, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How's the, my hair is sort of getting longer back to 1970s level. How's yours doing?
I was told off on a family Zoom just earlier today for the length of my hair and beard. And I've been told off by my parents for the length of my hair for years, but the beard is a lockdown special. And I'll be trimming both later in the week. But it's nice in a way to be, feel like a wild man in your own home as the days all blend endlessly into one. And
they do. And yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was done, Vic. I was done.
Good. I am getting back to the 1970s in terms of my clothes as well. So I'm quite happy all of those which reside in my wardrobe are being used. Now we're going to talk about how it is for comedians at the minute, because, as I said, it's extraordinary times. People are suffering badly, and of course we should never forget that. But in terms of jobs, that's also an effect on many people, and we'll talk about that as well this evening because it's an important part of your life, clearly. But as we can see behind you, I think there's a Glenn Hoddle special shirt, is that right? And a Wembley flag. Tell us about that Wembley flag.
It's a Wembley flag from the 2010 playoff final. The first Wembley heartbreak of my career as a Swindon fan, being a bit young for some of the earlier ones. And that was then repurposed as a promotion celebrating flag in 2012, 2 years later. And I've crossed out Wembley 2010 and just written Champions 2012 or something on it. And it doesn't, if I'm honest, always reside with quite such pride of place in my childhood bedroom, which is where I currently am. Nor am I permanently bedecked in a Swindon scarf. But I logged into the Zoom call 20 minutes ago, saw the array of shirts behind you, photographs, memorabilia, etc., and thought, I've not put in the yards visual-wise for Vic. A lot of this stuff is at home and it's to hand, and I've actually had a bit of it in the backdrop of a show I did for BT Sport a few weeks ago. So the flag went on the wall, the shirt went on the door, the scarf went round the neck, and I've got a few programmes at my feet and an old duvet cover, if you want me to really prove my mettle.
Marvellous. I have to say that there was a message on Twitter from a colleague of mine who works for BBC Spotlight in the Southwest, asking Plymouth Argyle fans to put out their photographs of Argyle shirts to celebrate possibly promotion this week. I sent him a picture of those shirts behind me, so I hope he uses them.
Well, you're behind enemy lines, aren't you, Vic?
Well, kind of, yeah. But that made New Year's Day down at Plymouth extra special. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's go back to the beginning then. You were born in Tokyo. This is what it says on Wikipedia, and I always believe everything that I read on Wikipedia. Is that right?
Wikipedia is a trustworthy source. I was born in Tokyo due to my father's business adventures in the 80s, all above board. He left university with a passion for the Far East, and I was one of the product of that passion. But we then moved back to England in 1991, so I have no related anecdotes, I'm afraid.
Fair enough.
Nor even a side fascination with, Grampus 8 or any other.
But then you moved to the rather delightful village of Oldbourne. That's not bad, is it?
It's not bad at all. And, I've appreciated it all the more over the last 3 months, because it's pretty much the most, it's the longest unbroken spell I've spent here since I went to boarding school at the age of 7. So it's been a very, intense period of local time. I'm very lucky, obviously, to be able to retreat during this time to a family home with a garden and a load of Swindon town memorabilia. And I'm aware that a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I'm very grateful for that. But it is also nice to be at the hearth and to be just 15 minutes away from the dormant county ground, where I hope at some point this year to be celebrating promotion, even if it's just with a sort of rain dance around the car park.
There is an irony, of course, at the moment. At the minute, you would have plenty of time to go and watch the town play when you don't normally when you're working.
Yeah,
but of course, you can't watch the town play.
It's bittersweet stuff, Vic, I can tell you. And actually, I'd already had a bit of a twist in that regard, because I was going to go to Melbourne. There's a comedy festival in Melbourne, Australia, not Derbyshire, although I'm a fan of both. And I've done it before, and it's a wonderful opportunity, and I was very grateful to be asked back. But it goes through the whole of April. So I accepted it back in the autumn, back in the early days of the autumn, when Swindon might have been looking at a playoff push. Maybe, Richie Wellens, a promising young manager, a new recently assembled team. That was all we could really hope for. And then as we started to stormed our way to first and stayed there, I then reflected on the fact that we'd have potentially promotion ceiling spring that I was going to miss out on the whole of. And I'd get back for the playoffs, but I didn't want to get back in time for the playoffs. I wanted no playoffs. I've had enough Wembley days. Thank you. So yeah, I was going to miss that. And then Melbourne was basically cancelled about 3 days before football was put on, indefinite hiatus. For 3 days, I thought, right, I'm going to be there, lifting the, watching us lift the trophy. And then it became very quickly clear that football was not part of the agenda either.
Go on. Sorry.
Well, it's sad because it's celebrating on the pitch in 2012 was one of the great days, in any respect, and in 2007 to a slightly lesser extent, not as champions. So I was very, very up for that, and obviously people have lost far, far more significant things than the opportunity to celebrate a default promotion in this pandemic, but it is a shame.
Yeah, you might be able to notice precariously balanced on CDs behind me is the 2012 championship team.
2012. Is that Alan Connell in the top left?
Absolutely, it is Alan Connell. Yes, that's quite right.
Blurry photo. Is there a topless Simon Ferry in there somewhere?
No, but I do have to hand, if you just bear with me a moment, just bear with me in my window.
His lucky underpants.
This is Simon Ferry. We keep Simon Ferry in the window. We've lovingly named this Simon Ferry. So
that's beautiful. What a lovely
I'll put it back in the window if you don't mind. Right, so there we are. So what was so special about 2012 then? What made it so special? Obviously, it's the Paolo Di Canio era, and so therefore it was an extraordinary time at the football club. Let's face it, this Italian legend comes to manage our team. What was so special about 2012?
Well, it was just quite a sort of surreal it was so surreal that he was the manager and that he really seemed to to care about it. I mean, he doesn't really seem to have a not caring setting, obviously. Sort of pouring passion into whatever role he's been given at whatever time. Absolutely fascinated to learn of what he's done for the last 7 years since Sunderland or whatever, but there's a mystery unto us. But so he was this sort of box office draw. I think it was also because it had been very sad not to beat Millwall in 2010, and then 2011 had just been so bleak. To see a team of such potential, and with a couple of quite glamorous signings, Vincent Perricard, need I go on? to just have, and I don't know the full story of what was going on behind the scenes, and maybe I never will, but it, essentially not playing with the passion or ability you might hope for from a squad containing the likes of Jonathan Douglas and David Prutton. So I found that a very gutting season, and actually I was sort of saved from having to watch basically any of it because I did languages at uni. So that was my university year abroad. So I was actually saved from having to watch Swindon, because instead I was going to watch Zenit St. Petersburg with my weekends, which have if anything, even more diehard sort of ultra fan base. And by the time I came back, we were in League Two, and then suddenly over the summer, it all kicked off. And I was then, by that point, back in my last year at a university whose name you've actually said you won't speak.
I find it very difficult to say the O word. You can mention it, it's fine.
I was popping down the A420 with a heavy heart to fulfill my academic obligations at the Firoz Kassam University. And I was then popping back up the A420 on the 66, or in my Ford Fiesta, to watch Paolo Di Canio's team in action as much as possible. And it was a bit like this season where you didn't believe that much. You had that September or August, September, where we lost about 6 games in a row, and you thought, this isn't working. All of these Italian, bargain buys are not coming together as we'd hoped. And then a lot more money, problematically, was thrown at the issue. And suddenly we were just steamrolling it. And the fact that I was, a student with the time to come back quite regularly, and, in this sort of emotional twilight period of my own, sort of university days, combined with the team being as exciting as I've ever known them, and then champions with a pitch invasion with my friend Tom, still my Twitter photo. It was really, really great stuff. So I was pleased to see that in your background.
Yeah, lovely. And you'll remember, of course, that we always used to have that post-match tradition where Paolo Di Canio would come out to the middle of the pitch, hold his scarf aloft. Absolutely. And I think that's the abiding memory of that season, isn't it? It was just, I don't know, it just was organic. It grew and it grew and it grew. And it became so essential that you hung back after the game just to watch that happen.
I went to watch us away at Leicester in the 4th round of the FA Cup, having seen us beat Wigan a few weeks beforehand. There was a period during the Leicester game which we weren't, expected to have much of a chance in, and basically were out of quite early on, but where we were just chanting his name for about 15 minutes unbroken. And maybe that's a silly thing to be moved by, but there was such a shared, and it's now sort of back with Richie, which is what's so exciting. And Richie is actually, a more exciting prospect in many ways, because, he's got his head screwed on a bit more, and you don't feel he's liable to explode at any moment. And he's, he lacks a little bit of the bombast of Di Canio, but actually sort of talks a bit more sense. But it's the first time that there's been a manager where the name is being chanted with that, and the sense that the sort of passion goes both ways. Mark Cooper, I thought obviously put together a lovely team and deserves a lot of credit for getting us to Wembley, even if it was then absolutely traumatic when we got there. But I never felt that same. It was a little bit sterile still, that era. Whereas Di Canio, you would chant his name and you would chant, Paolo, Paolo, give us a wave. And if he was sat in the dugout, not that he ever was, he'd occasionally flick his leg forward and you'd just see, the sharp end of a Chelsea boot or whatever poking out. And he was very, for all his, sort of lunacy, you also got the sense that he was very aware of just how much power and how much excitement he aroused. So he really played us like a fiddle. And the celebrations at the end of matches were absolutely phenomenal. Anyone missing those to beat the traffic on the Magic Roundabout does not deserve to call themselves a fan.
We always in the Arkle stand where I sit, we always used to do a little group of us, and we used to take bets onto when he would actually hit the plexiglass on the side of the dugout. Yes, because exactly. That was one of the great highlights of the game, wasn't it?
Who was it whose away dugout, he kicked through.
Allegedly, Bournemouth. Allegedly, my lad. On a very rainy Saturday afternoon in Dorset. Yes, it was Bournemouth. Bournemouth, who are now in the Premier League. Unbelievable. So, let's go back to Old Bourne then. Is that when you're, sometimes it's not a great thing to have this passion for Swindon, is it? As you've already hinted, there are dark times that you have to go through, but all the good times make up for those. Is that when your passion for it was first ignited?
Well, we moved here when I was young, and then I got into football. And I'm afraid to say, like many little boys of the late 90s, I was a Man United fan for about a year or two. And, it was the glory hunter's choice. And what glory. And then my dad said, and he didn't really say it with any belief that anything would come of it, because he was, he deserves some credit for getting me into football and playing football with me in the garden, but my dad's not massively into it, and he's not massively into like following professional football beyond, match of the day, sort of, farting his way through dinner on a Saturday night. And so I think he was just really not taking the mick, obviously, but he said you should support your local team. Go and watch Swindon Town. They need you. And so I think it was to his surprise that I turned around and said, yeah, all right, then let's go and watch Swindon next weekend. And he then suddenly found himself having to drive me to the county ground quite a lot more than he would have ever had to drive me to Old Trafford, brackets, never. And that's kind of how it all began, an attempt to call my dad's bluff. And he never really sort of got into it himself that much, although the only time where I felt that he was much more in the thick of it than me was when in 2001 I was at boarding school by this point, and I was not granted the required sort of exit weekend from school to come and watch Swindon's crucial relegation 6-pointer against Peterborough.
Oh yes.
And my dad said, "Oh, well, I'll just go. I'll go with your Uncle James instead. He's ran for the weekend." So my dad and my Uncle James got to watch Danny Invincible save us from successive relegations, and it still ranks as one of the Swindon games I'm most gutted to have missed. And it's one of the very few times where his passion for it has really started to feel like it could mould into anything really concrete. But, boarding schools are very strict with their weekends away, Vic. It becomes a free-for-all if parents can just take their kids out for any old relegation 6-pointer against
I won't go on about what a great finish it was then by Danny Invincible, because that just annoyed even more. Actually, my memory's fading. I'm getting a bit older. But didn't Neil Ruddock score in that game? Or am I going completely...
I couldn't tell you for sure. It doesn't sound
No.
familiar. I think Neil Ruddock joined the following year.
Yeah, you might be right. You see,
because I remember we then left that year. We lived in Australia for a couple of years, and so I would cut the Swindon articles, such as they were, or the tiny little match reports, out of a newspaper called British Football Weekly, which is sold in Australia, and I would stick them in my scrapbook. And I seem to remember quite clearly sticking a lot of articles about the Roy Evans, Neil Ruddock joint part. I haven't imagined that, have I? That was
no, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because Roy Evans joined. He was there manager for about 6 months. So we kind of had this sort of parade of people. We'd had Colin Todd was manager for a little while. So then we had Roy Evans. We had this sort of parade of people. Andy King, and it was a very sort of topsy-turvy time, if you like, in terms of management. So you're right. Yeah.
Hang on. No, I think I'm confusing my eras, because Wise was later on with was Wise with Evans?
No, Dennis Wise came with Gustavo Poyet.
Wise was with Poyet. I've mixed up my doubles. This is the problem. Evans and Ruddock 01, 02. Wise and Poyet 07 or something like that, yeah. 06.
But Dennis Wise, of course, was only there briefly.
They never stuck around too long. It was amazing that we had Paulo for 18 months, to be honest. Although what might have been, that's the big one, I think, for me. That remains the, finishing that season, 2 promotions in a row. he could have left then. Then all you got to be is not be one of the 3 worst teams in the Championship. But that league has started to look like such a distant promised land, and we had such momentum. And I was living quite a miserable post-uni life in my grandma's house in 2013 in London, unable to pay my own way through the quite meagre stand-up comedy that I was performing at the time. No disrespect to my gran, who is a lovely woman and a lovely landlady, but I remember sitting up all night reading the sort of message board on the advertiser as it was confirmed that he was gone, and that we would instead be putting our trust first in Fabrizio Picaretta and then in Darren Ward and Tommy Miller, another great duo for a game. And then slightly underwhelming Kevin McDonald.
Yes, Kevin McDonald, who took us into the playoffs, of course. You mentioned 2010 and that playoff final. We had Charlie on last week, Charlie Austin, of course, who the infamous bobble. Nobody in that Swindon end, I was commentating on the game, nobody expected him to miss that. But as we now know, the bobble was the reason for him missing that. We will never blame Charlie for that.
Blame the bobble, that's it. It's amazing how, when I talk about it to people, even though, as much as he's still a Swindon, modern legend, he has moved on. We don't have to defend his honour anymore, and yet there's still this, of course it was the bobble, we don't even question ex-player Charlie Austin and go, maybe he just, fluffed it on the big occasion. But that was hard. I mean, Millwall, they were good. I don't think I travelled to Wembley with a huge amount of hope in my heart that day either. But, and it certainly wasn't as, blink and you miss it as the Preston game 5 years later. But it's just galling, isn't it, to be a game away?
It certainly is, yes. And of course, we'd had a perfect record at Wembley until the new Wembley, which, I'm lucky enough to seen all 6 appearances there. So I've seen us win there 3 times, but never, of course, at the new Wembley, not even score at the new Wembley, which, at some point we must be able to do, I think. Yes.
It's pretty, and I was at Chesterfield, so I've got a perfect 0 from 3 record over the last, decade for Wembley. So that's why I don't have a huge, and again, the 2015 one, that was like my dad came to that. My dad and my then still relatively sort of new girlfriend came, and I was buzzing from how exciting the Sheffield United game had been, and how that will probably always be the greatest football match I'll ever have been at. And even though actually we were defensively all over the shop, and I'd watched us get thumped by MK Dons and Bristol City over the Easter weekend, and Preston were really good, you still thought it's a playoff final. We've had this unbelievably dramatic game against Sheffield United. Let's get the troops in. And I did think, my dad, it's 14 years after Danny Invincible. He's not really paid much attention since, but we're on the verge of the Championship. Here we go. And just for it to be over as a spectacle in a quarter of an hour, neither he nor the girlfriend really ever, could be persuaded to take much interest thereafter. And who could blame them?
No, it's a painful experience, and sitting in the car park on the buses coming out of there, you just wanted to get out there as quickly as you possibly could. Now we are at a time when we are hopefully going to get some sort of decision this week from the Football League. Who knows whether we will or not, but there's a meeting tomorrow, and it will be hopefully a championship for Swindon, but a strange one, won't it? And we as fans won't immediately get an opportunity to celebrate. Richie Wellens said last week he would hopefully get a game between the current Swindon team and the 2012 team when fans can return to the stadium, which would be fantastic.
I didn't know that, Vic. That's fantastic.
So, what are your feelings about this season? And in terms of how it's panning out, it's just such a strange one. They should all be on holiday by now, shouldn't they? Season should be over. Players should be in Ibiza, and we should be looking forward to next year.
At Ibiza, doing whatever the hell they want to celebrate a magnificent League Two title. Although I'm sure Owen Doyle would be at home with his family like the responsible domestic legend that he is. But some of the younger boys, maybe. I guess, and by the way, I'm sorry I haven't watched the entirety of the Richie Wellens interview from a few days ago. I didn't know that about the 2012 team, and that is music to my ears. I've not watched a sort of Swindon heritage match ever, and what a collision of the two greatest seasons I've had as a Swindon fan, with Paul Caddis presumably swapping ends at half time.
Well, he said Paul Caddis will play for the 2012, the team, he thinks. So, first player to get 2 promotions as captain with Swindon, or he has an extraordinary record, doesn't he?
It's a lovely record. And him coming, that's the thing, this season, it's been, obviously the Di Canio era, would have a nice little, book full of hijinks to be written about it. But this season as well, for everything that's happened, for that saga with a lovely happy ending through January about Jerry Yates and Owen Doyle, the constant, firstly the sort of hitting our stride in the autumn, him breaking all these records, top scorer in Europe or whatever, every article being but they probably won't keep him in January, so this sort of constant sense of unease about how long that could last, and then the worst coming to pass, and then the second punch of Jerry, and then getting them both back, and and then the sort of creeping sort of coronavirus thing, but also, like as you say, Paul Caddis coming back. It's real sort of scriptwriter stuff. A returning legend to sort of guide a load of less experienced players through, and so I've got very fond memories. I didn't go to as many games as I'd have liked to. It's always hard with stand up to sort of balance it, because often even if Swindon at home, you're at the wrong part of the country. So actually the most fun I have is often trying to sort of sneak an away game in if I'm near there. But I went to some fun aways. I went to Forest Green, even though we chucked it away slightly. I went to Crawley, where we murdered them. I went to Northampton a week or two before everything shut down. And the winner against Northampton would be right up there, I think, for sort of all-time moments. And it was such a buzz around it, and such a good team. I mean, the strikers, get the headlines, but I think Anthony Grant is one of the great central midfielders I've seen play for the club. I think, watching players like Keshi come on so much, anyone who was, in the less, ideal 2017 relegation team to still be here and suddenly improving and suddenly be such a sort of machine. I think Rob Hunt's been fantastic. Stephen Bender in goal. Like I love the team. I think they're such a great group. I think they are gelled and ready for the championship. Ready for League One. Ready for the championship. Maybe getting ahead of myself slightly, but it's really, it doesn't feel like we've fluked it. And the quality of the football, the goals against Crawley, I'll watch them back, and I watch them back accompanied by the legendary Twitter commentary of Marley STFC, and that's another thing. Like, it's the club's social media, I think, has been fantastic this season. I think they've managed to sort of capture the buzz around the club and transmit it to fans who aren't there, as I frequently am not. Obviously, it's easier to do good social media when things are going well, and I remember when we were losing every week in 2017, you'd see these slightly half-hearted social media posts from the club, or all the players saying, "We go again next week," and it just winds you up. Whereas actually, there's no end to my pleasure to seeing that Swindon have won, and that Anthony Grant has done a load of emojis on Twitter, and it's like, he's done 9 emojis. But you've got, Marley's alternative commentary videos. You've got all the podcasts from Low Strangers. I got to make a video where I got to go backstage and meet Owen Doyle and Michael Doughty. I've loved being a part of it.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because it was a real love letter, I think, to Swindon, and the fact that you described that walk from Graham Street and then Fleming Way and then the Magic Roundabout and then a wet Saturday at the county ground. All right, it might look a bit dismal to many people, but to those of us who go there, of course, the seeing the county ground never gets dull, does it? I mean, it's just, I drive up from Devon every week, for goodness sake, and I cannot wait to get to that edifice, that building. It is just a bizarre thing that we share.
I think it's. I mean, I'm delighted that you've referred to it as a love letter, because that was very much the brief and the intention, the sincere intention. But also, it was quite nice to, muck around a little bit. It was a very fun, if quite cold and long day, but to sort of get to go behind the scenes and genuinely be as excited as I really was, and then just sort of have that captured on camera and then edited together. And then I went to Forest Green probably a couple of weeks after it came out, and I don't crave the attention or the respect of Swindon fans, nor do I deserve it. But it was quite exciting, the video having come out, and then to be there. And I was with my friend Tom, but people were coming out going, "Where's your brother?" Because my brother had been in the video at the Mansfield game. And I thought, okay, this is. I feel I've put my Swindon fandom on the map successfully, and I've not, hopefully come out, like the complete plonker that you slightly fear you might when you do these sorts of things.
No, it's very good, and I loved all of it really. In terms of it, just was summed up that day. The day of going to the county ground and the magic roundabout, which is, I remember when it was a green roundabout, it was grass, that kind of thing.
Well, you remember the roundabout, of course.
What's wrong with the magic roundabout? Just look to your right. It's not difficult, is it? In terms of going to games, though, it is difficult for you because you've had an extremely successful career in comedy. How did that start? I mean, you went to Eton. I'll just put that in there because you did. Michael Doughty went to.
Yeah, it feels like that's not as dirty a word as Oxford, so that's fine.
Michael Doughty, of course, went to Harrow. When you two met, there wasn't a bit of a punch-up going on behind the scenes, was there?
I was delighted that I got to reference the Eton Harrow thing to Michael Doughty, because any opportunity to sort of offset the fact that I'm the posh, idiot in the room is absolutely ideal. And the fact that Michael Doughty has had this, really quite a nice life of his own, but a nice life which has led him to pulling the strings in the town midfield is great. So that was nice, and also it distracted me from the intense anxiety I was feeling of being sat next to Owen Doyle. So it was all good. But you're very kind to describe the career as very successful. It always feels like a bit of a work in progress, and there's always things that I would like to achieve that feel out of reach, possibly forever. But I'm very grateful that I've been able to do it as a career at all for the last 8 years since I left uni. And it was just a student hobby, really. I was at uni. There was a comedy night where you could come and try it, if you thought you got 5 minutes. And I didn't have any mates, and I figured it would be a nice way to sort of try something without any social pressure on it. And it went okay. And I did more gigs at uni, and then I went to the Edinburgh Fringe, and then I was busy enough after I left uni that I could sort of make a go on it, provided, as I say, that I lived with my grandma and spent all of my days and nights that weren't doing gigs just sat in her living room reading updates on the Wash Bag or the Adver. But yeah, so that's the career, and it is quite busy now. I mean, it's also busy because I've got a baby now, and she is the light of my life, and will be making her county ground debut at some point in the next year or two, I hope. But that's been the other hard thing in the last year, is it's harder to justify the trip down, and you have to plan everything a bit more forensically, and you have to get your bookings in before your partner. And the worst was the Exeter game this year, and Edie's mum had something very important with her family, and I hadn't anticipated quite how emotionally potent the Exeter game was going to be, because Owen didn't come back by that point, or Jerry. And then just that week, as you started to see all the it's going to be a sellout. The county ground will never have seen an atmosphere like it. I was going, you've got to sack off your family so I can go and watch Swindon's reunited strike force beat Exeter. But that didn't happen, and that was galling in the extreme. But then on the flip side, as I say, you get to be in the away end for quite some fun, matches. I was doing a gig up near Manchester last year and got to go and watch us beat Bury away in the now sadly, retired Gig Lane. and I was jumping about on the concourse, and I even made it onto Quest TV. So that was a real high point.
Yeah, it was a great game, absolutely fantastic game. I hate to tell you that I was doing commentary on the Exeter game for BBC Radio Devon, which was always an experience, but what an atmosphere it was. And but we'll gloss over it like the Danny Invincible goal, if that's okay with you.
Those are two. I'd say those are two of the top 5 real regrets, possibly top 3.
Yeah, one of the best atmospheres I've seen for a long time. Anyway, we won't go on about it. But you've appeared on Fighting Chance. I remember we've driven up many times listening to Fighting Chance, and you've been on there, and you've always referenced Swindon, which is always a lovely thing to do. For somebody who's going to a Swindon game, to hear somebody talk about your team on a national thing is always a bit of a buzz.
Oh, well, that's great, Vic. I love the thought of that. I'm really very much doing the show, picturing you in your car. That's what gets me up in the morning. And to be honest, it's very useful, because the point of the show is that you've got to find answers to these quite random questions that no one else will have. And, with no disrespect to our beloved club and its sort of wider profile, if you give a Swindon answer, you're probably not going to tread on anyone else's toes. And actually that show kind of likes, lower league real football fans, if I may describe myself as such. So you can lean into it. The producers do have a bit of a rule where you can't, basically, if you make every answer a Swindon answer, there's a word in your ear going, you've got to diversify this. But at least 1 or 2 per episode is a real treat. And it's a chance to give a shout out to my friend Tom that I go to games with, or to the London Reds, the WhatsApp group that keeps me updated with various sort of nostalgia sort of based angles on the club. So you feel like you're representing.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I've watched several of your routines, and I love them, because you talked about Wi-Fi headphones in one particular one,
right?
Which, in fact, you referenced Led Zeppelin, and I'm wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt.
Oh, terrific! That's lovely. Well, you're not sporting wireless headphones. I'm sorry.
No, oh, gosh, I wouldn't know what to do with wireless headphones. You see, you are talking to somebody who just about managed to get landscape on his iPad last week for the first time.
Many congratulations to you. A huge development.
Thank you very much. So where do you get your stories from? Is it just literally everyday life? A lot of comedy is observational, of course. Is that what you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much, it's actually not massively imaginative stuff, you'd have to say. I have to hope that, the jokes and the angles are good, because the source material is just pretty lazily autobiographical stuff. I don't really dream any bigger than, what happened to me when I was growing up and what happened to me this morning. And I guess I do lean on the fact that I went to a school with a certain reputation, not a very good reputation, fair enough. And so that means that I feel I can stand out a little bit from the many, many other stand-up comics of my sort of age and stage. And you can make a few, posh jokes and try to sort of own that aspect of your background. And I guess in recent years, it's become a bit more relevant to my adult experience, to current affairs a little bit more. And now that I've had a baby, I've started banging on about that constantly, like all other new parents. But it is something I think about a lot in terms of how can I make this, slightly less just my, essentially my diary on stage, because there'll come a point where maybe, that will cease to be remotely interesting, or it might become a bit too private. And I don't really talk about Swindon Town very much, because I kind of feel I do that best on the various sports radio shows that I'm generously invited to appear on. But I've never quite managed to make the Swindon gear work in a live setting.
Oh, you must do it one day. You also, of course, not too long ago, featured on Have I Got News for You, this remarkable new remote format. And as a comedian, you work off a reaction, I guess. The reaction you get from an audience. So how different is it when you haven't got an audience? It must be slightly different to gauge. Is it difficult?
I would describe it as unbelievably awkward, Vic. It really is one of the lonelier ways in which you can try and sort of ply an already quite sort of lonely and surreal job. I mean, I was very, again, grateful and lucky to be on the show. It's obviously a show with an amazing history and repute. And so it's very exciting to get to do. I did it here in my parents' house. I did not, I'm afraid, have either the Burma Swindon top or the 2012/2012 flag, or indeed the scarf around my neck. But I had a pile of Swindon programmes at my feet to remind me where my loyalties lay. And you're just staring into a screen which is divided up into 4, and you've got Hislop, and you've got Merton, you've got Joe Brand hosting it, and then Katie Balls, who was the journalist from The Spectator, who was great. And you're trying to sort of focus on all of them, listen to what they're saying, remember whatever it is you've decided that you're going to try and say about the news, which is hard, particularly in this, very sensitive and scary time. You've got to try and be funny and quip, but not be too light-hearted and not reveal too much of one's own privilege. And then you've got to do it all into a screen, and you're sat alone in your room. You've got your daughter upstairs. You hope that she doesn't wake up too early, and in a way it might be a blessed relief for her to start screaming. She'd done a really magnificent number 2 about 10 minutes before we were due to start filming, so that had really occupied my last minutes of prep. And it's hard, and you've got a delay as well, which is actually much worse than the delay that I've got with you here, where I feel we're really in tune with one another, mano a mano. Whereas on that, you would say something and it would get nothing, and you'd think, oh, it's because of the delay, and you'd wait a second, and then it would still get nothing. So you were experiencing what I would call the double death of your less successful quips. And actually, people were quite supportive, and Ian and Paul would chuckle along, and I think it edited okay, so it looked all right on the telly, but it was quite a surreal experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. Let's be honest, it takes a great deal of courage for people to get on a stage and tell a joke or a story, because let's be honest, you've no idea what people are going to think of you. I mean, I've worked in radio for 30 odd years, and the point is this: you never see anybody. It's just you visualize one person listening, that's it. But for you, of course, you have an audience in front of you. When you started, how scary was that? Obviously I was quite nervous before my early gigs, and I'm still quite nervous before any gigs that are, important, whether that's, recording a TV episode or just performing at the Wyvern Theatre. But I don't remember being really intimidated by the audience, because I just kind of had this pathetic fantasy of doing stand-up comedy. So I was just really intrigued to see how it would go. And as I started to do gigs, I started, to be fair, at uni, and mostly I was doing, gigs in student bars to other students. So you sort of felt like you were among friends. And when I started going further afield, it was a bit more intimidating, because suddenly I felt very young. I felt like a little posh kid who'd, traveled to Liverpool for the weekend and was out of my depth. But then on the other hand, you don't know any of them personally. So even if it's gone terribly, you're just going to go and get on the National Express, open your Haribo, and move on with your life. So I learned to kind of relish it quite early on. And obviously I died some magnificent deaths, and those are very humiliating in the moment, but none of them were bad enough to make me not want to do it. And sometimes it is fun to do something like a bit of radio, where you're actually in a bit more of a bubble. You get to sort of perform as you like, but you don't have such an immediate sense of whether it's going well or badly, and so you relax into it a bit more. I guess the problem is now you've got social media giving you constant feedback, and that's not always expressed with the greatest deal of affection or professional respect. I mean, I did love the story about Colchester when you said you were at the railway station, you met a couple there, and they started to give you feedback about your gig, and they'd left, what was it, 90% through. You got there before them, and they'd left before you finished.
They'd left.
It was a great story.
They couldn't believe I made it to the station so fast, given they'd left while I was still on. I don't mind that at all. I will take 1,000 of those over, someone with an egg on their profile picture having a go at me on Twitter, because, listen, there's nothing, particularly as an away football fan, I respect more than people's need to make that last train out of town. And, if you've got to leave during a tedious Ivo Graham anecdote about boarding school, you've got to do what you've got to do.
Now, you mentioned all the programmes that you have at your feet. Which is your particular favourite? If you can sort of delve down and have a quick look.
What I'm enjoying at the moment is that I was here with I was larking about with my 15-month-old daughter a couple of days ago, and she grabbed this, which now we've already delved around the fact that I'm a boy who went to Eton and then went to university in Oxford, not a likable chap. And now here I am holding up a picture of Judas Iscariot himself, Dr. No, as I heard him referred to by someone after his performance at Bristol when he was asked whether he wanted us to get promoted. Anyway, because I think, I'm not saying that I've got the chiseled jaw of a young Aidan Flint, but maybe because he's wearing a hat, and because I often wear a sort of hat when I take my daughter out for her morning walk, she picked this up and started going dada, dada at it. And it was with a real mixture of emotions that I looked at the treacherous, sort of aggressively bearded and tattooed, and yet still handsome and muscular Aidan Flint, who was, lest we forget, a real rock at the back during the sort of glory years. And I thought, yeah, all right, if there are worse Swindon players that my daughter could be projecting a sort of paternal fantasy onto than Aidan Flint in his 2012 prime. I mean, the fact that he was allowed to appear on the cover of the programme in a sort of fashion top and a baseball beanie rather than any sort of club memorabilia shows just what a fearsome man he clearly was, and how maybe already his loyalties were turning elsewhere.
He was magnificent in that season. And of course, never forget Brentford in the playoff semi-final.
That's in the top 3 regrets.
No.
I could have gone. I can't remember what my reason was there either, because I think I was at Grand's for it. But maybe it was just that I hadn't managed to get a ticket and I hadn't, put in the work to try and find one online. But I'd been to Brentford away. I'd been to Griffin Park earlier that season where I think we drew 1-1, and I've got no idea why I didn't go to that semi-final. And obviously it would have been heartbreaking, the penalty shootout. But I'd say that the 2 videos I've watched, or the 2 moments I've watched over and over again on YouTube, are Aidan Flint's header going in against Brentford in 2013 and the Killers bringing on the Pet Shop Boys at Glastonbury last year. I think if I could put myself in a time machine to go back to not a full set of anything, but to a single sort of second of anything, it would be those 2 moments. And yeah, anyway, there he is. Me. As far as my daughter is concerned, it's just a pair of twins staring back at you.
Well, fair enough. If you're going to be likened to somebody, you might as well be likened to a 6-foot+ athletic person.
Yeah.
You can't really go wrong with that. What else have you got in that bundle? Anything else that springs to mind that you would like to share with us?
This was
my
duvet cover at Eton College. Now, I'm not going to make any sort of lewd jokes about what went on beneath the duvet cover at Eton College, because I make quite enough of those in my stand-up comedy. Nonetheless, whether, whatever adolescent insecurities may have been being expressed, they were being expressed underneath one of the less loved badges, I think, in the club's history. And yet, because it was my first, to me, it's the definitive. The diamond is the Swindon badge, and I actually find that, the various iterations of the new insignia with its needless levels of detail and heritage a bit fussy compared to the old green and red. What's your thought?
Well, of course, Glenn Hoddle played a major part in designing that particular
I didn't
badge.
know that.
Yeah, and
Really?
yeah, absolutely. That was part of one of his things whilst he was at the club. So, you have an affinity with the great Glenn there.
We really do have a lot to thank the great Glenn Hoddle for, don't we?
Well, it was just magnificent, wasn't it? And I just remember a League Cup tie at Torquay United. Not many people would remember it, but I'm not going to go on and on about things I've done. But anyway, the manager of Torquay at the time rang me up, so sports producer at Radio Devon, and he said, I think Mickey Hazard is the main player in the Swindon team, not Glenn Hoddle. Okay, fair enough. That's your view. You're a manager, I'm not. Within 30 seconds of the game starting, Glenn Hoddle hits a magnificent pass to David Kerslake from 60 yards away. Kerslake squares it. Swindon go 1-up. They win 6-0, I think, on the night. To see a player like that play for our club, and Wembley, of course, against Leicester, one of the great games. Nobody will ever forget it. I mean, what a player! And to see him play for us.
I'm very sad that it predates me a little bit. I'd have had to be a very enterprising fan at the age of 4 to be demanding to be taken to the county ground by my dad. But I wish I had done. I mean, because annoyingly, as well as, what a great thing that would have been to witness myself, it's the only thing people ever really ask about Swindon. Your casual football fans know that Swindon is a great pointless answer for, Premier League teams. They know vaguely that there was one, let's be honest, quite sort of statistically disastrous, if still emotionally very resonant season back in the early 90s. So they go, where's Swindon in the Premier League? Did you? And I go, yes, we were, but I'm afraid I was a little young to watch us become the first team concede 100 goals in a Premier League season or whatever. So that it would be great for Swindon to rise up to the point again, not just that, the club can get the glory it deserves, but also that, my less footballingly integrated friends might have an idea of what was going on. And Di Canio was the only time that really, it felt like people took a real interest, I think.
What about now then? Where are we going, do you think? Because I think with Richie Wellens, we have a manager who has united the fan base in a way that I can't remember for a long time. And, he has the fans on his side. It's that simple, and has put together a great team. Where do you think we can go, bearing in mind that we have all this financial uncertainty about football at the minute? Who knows when the next season's going to start? What players will be available? What do you think we can achieve?
Well, we're not tackling, are we, the elephant in the room, which is all these, a potential extra financial uncertainties, which I'll be honest, I don't really understand. And maybe that's because, very little has been published about it. Maybe it's because I'm sort of in denial about any possibility of us, not, being able to see at least League One football, if not Championship football again. But I mean, do you have any opinions, any insight, any words of reassurance for me, Vic?
The only words I can say is that they are the matters of the court, and so it's very difficult to comment on matters of the court. But I, like you,
clear, Vic, loud and clear. We'll speak of it no more.
No. Like you, I am confused by the whole business, quite frankly. And what I fear, we are yesterday, the 30th anniversary, of course, of the decision being made that Swindon were demoted 2 divisions and then it put back in 1. I hope that this doesn't lead to something. That's all I can say. And Richie Wellens last week said he had full confidence to go forward. He was committed to the club. That's good enough for me at the minute. We'll see what happens.
And obviously we've got no idea what the future holds, but I found it even all of his messages in the last few weeks about that uncertainty I found to be extremely reassuring, but also sincere and just focused. I think that's why he is such a good PR figurehead for the club, because it's not frilly or frothy. It is just quiet dedication and passion and focus. And I guess that would be my answer to the question about next season. I don't know who we're going to keep of this team, whether that's due to what we're able to afford or whether to other clubs coming swooping. But given how much of it was put together in a matter of months, I would have every faith in similar players being recruited. I don't think we're probably going to have a striker scoring more goals than anyone else in Europe for us next season. I'd love Owen Doyle still to be with us next season, but even he's not likely to have quite such a hot streak again. But then that being said, he was so well served, and Jerry Yates, although I think he's even less likely to be playing for us next season, he did enough that you thought, well, if he'd been at the top of the diamond, he'd probably been the one getting 25 goals. Players were playing these selfless roles out wide. Even Owen Doyle, who was starting to have what looked worryingly, by comparison to his early season form, was potentially a bit of a cold streak just when the pandemic hit. It was his absolutely delicious floated cross against Northampton that sent in Jordan Lyden for the winner. So actually, what was great, or someone like Lloyd Isgrove, who was the most exciting Swindon player at the start of the season and starting to play a bit more of a secondary role, but still absolutely crucial. Someone like Tom Broadbent, who maybe hadn't been taken so seriously by the fans earlier in the season and had been, relegated down the pecking order, then coming back in with such authority in some of those latter games, including the Northampton one, where he was just everywhere. So I don't think there's anything more exciting as a fan than watching players start to gel under a manager and to watch them be man-managed, Of course, like a marquee signing is absolutely thrilling, or indeed a Paul Caddis coming back. But to have players who don't mean a lot to you then, start to make sense. And the Di Canio era had a bit of that, but you also slightly had this feeling that he was just, signing as many players as he possibly could. And you'd have to get excited about a Luke Rooney, for 300 grand or whatever it was, and then a month later have to abandon your excitement for Luke Rooney because Lee Holmes had come in suddenly. Whereas here, just the team and the squad, it makes such sense. So I'd love it to be the same squad again in League One, and I think we would, be at least a mid-table competitor. But to be honest, if we lose half of it, or we lose 3/4 of it, I would say if Richie's still there, he'll do it again. And we can get excited about back-to-back promotions. Obviously, I want to see Swindon in the Championship, again, because basically we were relegated from the Championship or then Division 1 the first time I ever supported Swindon, and it's basically been 2 decades of hoping we'll get back. But if we just need to, to steady the ship in League One and make sure we're financially solvent and well managed after some of the ups and downs of the last few years, as long as this latest thing doesn't come to anything, I'll be happy, because last season I thought we're going to be in League Two forever, or the season before, with all due respect to Phil Brown in particular, yesterday's tan, there was not a lot of hope around the club there, and you kind of started to think our next move is going to be down again. So I'm so pleased where I'm aware that in an interview full of unbelievably long answers, that was a rant, but I'm so excited by where we are. I really am.
Yeah, I think most town fans are. We got some questions for you in a minute from those who've been watching, which is fantastic. I just wanted to briefly touch on where you're at the minute, because theatres are shut, you can't tour. You are a writer as well as a stand-up, so you write for various things. What are you actually involved in at the minute?
Not a huge amount, Vic. It's very good of you to remind me of the professional uncertainty in which I wake up every morning. But to be honest, I'm not complaining. It's a very scary time, and a lot of people have it a lot worse than me. I'm getting to live in my parents' house in Wiltshire and spend every day with my daughter, and it's wonderful. Swindon are de facto champions of League Two, and I'm fairly confident that when comedy restarts, I will hopefully be busy again, and we'll make up for lost time. So I'm enjoying a bit of the nicer aspects of a bit of an enforced layoff. It would be nice if the gigs started again, this year, and I do feel that it looks like live performance is going to be one of the last things to come back, so it might be a while. And I was looking forward to a couple of Swindon things. I supported Josh Widdicombe at the Wyvern in February or March, and that was fun. But I was doing my own tour show at the Arts Centre in May, which I love doing every year, and is a chance to do a few sort of Swindon specific bits of material. So that got canned. I'm meant to be hosting a fundraiser at the Wyvern in September for the MS Society, which is a charity very close to my heart. That will almost certainly be postponed as well. So it's frustrating watching your diary just get shifted several months, but all of these things will come back around, and so I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for asking.
Good. Next time you speak to Josh Widdicombe, you can just remind him of Doyle's wonderful movement to get that second goal at Home Park.
We've been there as well. But nice that we've come up together. It's been a really good season for the Southwest in League Two.
Lovely. Right, Hannah, I think may well be around. Let's see if she reappears. There she is. Hello to you, Hannah. Now you've got some questions for Ivo as well, I think, haven't you?
Yes, we've had lots come in on Twitter and Facebook. Some career related, some Swindon related, so we'll have a nice balance of both. So starting off, we've got Pete, who asked, what's your favourite football-related stand-up moment?
Oh, my favourite football-related stand-up moment. I wish I had a good answer to this, and to be honest, I wish I completely understood the question. A bit of stand-up comedy about football, or a bit of my football career connected to stand-up comedy. I've never really, as I said to Vic, been able to make much Swindon material work, to be honest. I had a bit in a show I did a few years ago about playing as Swindon on FIFA, and taking us all the way up to the Premier League. But it was still pretty tedious stuff. My bit about playing as the 2004 Swindon team in my garden and trying to be both Sam Parkin and Tommy Mooney never really punched through either, to be fair. And some stand-ups have got good gear about it. I mean, Jason Manford had a very funny bit about Football Manager that he did on Live at the Apollo, I remember. But I don't feel I've given a remotely satisfactory answer to this question, and I'm sure that something very obvious is going to come to me shortly after we conclude this interview. But if I think of something better, I'll come back to it, Hannah.
That's all right, no problem. So Daz has asked, what is your favourite or your best joke about Swindon that you've used, if you can think of one?
This really is something that I should have been prepared for. And I suppose my answer would be that I don't have one, because I would never make light of my beloved in any sort of public forum.
Round of applause.
It's nice to have a round of applause. Because listen, I have to, because of various aspects of my schooling in particular, that I feel I need to apologise for on stage, and quite right too. If I have to apologise for Swindon Town as well, then my set will just become one really quite long series of apologies, and I will not apologise for doing that. If anything, it's the one thing I can say on stage that I feel roots me to something pure. And maybe I would try and make jokes about Oxford United in any sort of stand-up comedy. It's always nice to get a dig in at the three sides of the Kassam wherever I can. But to joke about the town,
Fair enough. So Swindon Sparkle has asked, why did you choose to support Swindon?
Well, I sort of covered this with Vic, really, I guess, that my family moved to Wiltshire when I was very young. I briefly, had posters of David Beckham and Ryan Giggs on my wall. And then my dad said you should support your local team. And so before the end of the day, Giggs and Beckham were in the bin and were replaced with the likes of Ty Gooden and Jordan Darr.
Marvellous.
Excellent choice. And we've got another question here about who is your favourite ever Swindon Town player, and who was the worst that you've seen?
Simon Ferry is my favourite ever, and Vic's already shown me his own.
Hang on, he's back because he's happy with that answer. Hang on. I'm just disturbing my neighbours out the front, but there he is,
Absolutely.
The great Simon.
Lovely to see Simon in his more flow state. My favourite season was 2012, the 2012 team. And I think I liked Simon Ferry because even before he sort of ran practically nude onto the county ground pitch to celebrate promotion, because he was, there's a sort of everyman about him, because he sort of, by his own admission and by Paolo Di Canio's insistence, was basically nearly too fat to play for Swindon. He was, he was obviously blessed with great skill, but he wasn't the most sort of unobtainably illustrious athlete. And he'd gone down with the town the season before, and so was slightly tarred with that brush. Felt he might be moved on. So for him to then be rejuvenated as the sort of creative energy of the town midfield, and the link-ups between him and Caddis and Matt Ritchie, I loved him. And the fact that he's now become a genuinely funny football pundit and sort of Swindon banter icon, it is just fully deserved and utterly thrilling. And I then met him at the Edinburgh Festival a couple of years ago. I recognised him across the Pleasance courtyard, of course, and introduced myself as a huge fan of Swindon Town. And I think he'd been celebrating the Edinburgh Festival as many people are inclined to celebrate it, of a hot summer's afternoon in a beer garden. And within a couple of minutes, we'd lent in for an ironic but still very meaningful French kiss. And it was absolutely wonderful. There's a picture of it on my Instagram, and I love the man very dearly indeed.
Yeah, he was, of course, I did a live Loathed Strangers podcast event at the County Ground, which you and I were both involved with, Hannah.
Yeah.
I gave him a lift back from Bristol Airport to Swindon. It was one of the...
Really, Vic?
Yeah, he's a lovely man, and I would, defend him to the hilt against anybody. He's just a great man. And
what did you talk about on the way back from the airport?
Love it. I couldn't possibly say, Ivo.
I'm not surprised.
There's a million NDAs surrounding those Strangers event. I love it.
So Simon was your favourite. Who was the worst player that you've ever seen at the County Ground?
It's sort of hard because you don't really want to stick the boot into anyone too much, really. I think that I touched on the disappointment that certain players in the year before the 2011 team didn't really live up to the reputations, maybe. So you'd have that'd be a sort of a Prutton maybe, or a Sheehan, and then there were some just not great players back in the early noughties, but I think the strikers, maybe. I think there was a period where there was people up front who didn't sort of strike any sort of fear into. I'm sorry, I'm drying up because I don't really want to name or shame anyone, because I can picture the pressure of playing up front for Swindon Town, and particularly being berated by some of the less forgiving aspects of the town's sort of fan base. And I sympathise with that. So I've got names in my head like Ronan Murray and Fola Onibuje, but they were just doing their best. Who would be your answer, Vic? Who was your biggest disappointment?
Oh gosh, I'm very much like you. I kind of think there are many names that I could possibly say, but as somebody who I have a Devon Walking Football League winners medal, but I won't go on about that. But but I played Sunday League football, so who am I to judge?
Yeah. There were certain players in the. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, I can't think of anything worse. We mentioned about you with stand-up and the reaction of an audience, but I can't think of anything worse than there are certain players who always, whatever they do, have the crowd on their back. And I always think if the crowd's on your back, that makes it worse, because if you misplace a pass or you miss a goal, it just makes it worse and worse and worse. So I kind of always try to see the best in players, really.
It's hard. I mean, I suppose the big one from recent years is Luke Norris became a real, sort of poster boy for all the wrong reasons. And it was a turgid time for the club. And you didn't feel any faith at all when it got to him up front. But then it's, I sort of sympathise, and I like the fact that he got a shout out on This Country. Actually, I thought that was a lovely sort of affectionate touch in its own way, and from a show which has done so much for Swindon's media profile. So I'm not even really going to have a go at him. I suppose any of that team as well. The 2017 team were pretty dire, and then the first League Two team, James Dunn, was not great in midfield for that team. But I'm going to stop naming names. I've named enough.
We should say Luke Norris got 13 goals in the season, which, as a striker in a average team,
You know what? A few of those were penalties, but a few of those were hard-won goals from open play, Vic, and you're right to stick up for the man, and I'm sorry that I brought him into this conversation at all.
Right, moving on. So Dan has asked whether you'll be joining your daughter up for the Junior Reds and maybe attending one of their Christmas parties to meet Rock and Robin in the future.
It's a fantastic question, and I have not really looked into any of the admin of doing that, but now that you've said it, it's coming together in my mind. I don't really know, the ethics of dooming a child to support the same largely doomed football club as you've become dedicated to. And, ultimately, as in all aspects of her life, she's got to make her own choices. But there will be a few bits of Swindon Town merch creeping into her wardrobe in the next couple of years. I will be taking her to a game, and I love the team. Her mum is not really into Swindon, but she's quite sporty, so genetically there's a chance that she might want to be a junior Robin, and I will be giving it my best shot to force the issue.
Listen, we took our 6-month-old grandson to Wembley to watch the Preston game. Doesn't get much worse than that, does it?
Vic, I'm so sorry. Leave after 15 minutes?
I think we just worried about whether he'd been fed or not. That was the main concern for the rest of the game.
So Jason has asked, what are the chances of you attending a Skittles presentation in Chippenham next year for them? Do you usually get involved with sort of local events, things like that?
I have to say, I do not do a great amount of local events, not out of any snobbery on my part, but because of the fact that not a huge amount of local events have had any need for my quite limited services. I gig in Swindon a fair bit, not even that much, and often I feel quite sort of nervous about it because it feels like a sort of a home gig. I can't say that I have ever gigged in Chippenham, or indeed that I know what the Skittles is. What are we talking about here?
9-pin Skittles, I'm assuming, with 3 balls. You're trying to get nine Skittles down.
An afternoon of bowling in Chippenham, it would be a pleasure. Diary permitting, I'd say the chances are not not small.
The thing is with it, the more Skittles you play, the more beer you're drinking. So by the end of the evening, there are 27 Skittles rather than just 9.
Lovely.
And that's always helpful.
You speak from experience, and I...
very, very much so, yes.
So we've got another one, which is, do you get a lot of stick from other comedians who support Premier League teams because you support Swindon?
I would say not at all, actually. There are a lot of football fans amongst the sort of comedian community. There's a lot of ex sort of nearly pros in the comedy community as well. There's a weird overlap with that. And so there's a huge spread of fans across all sorts of lower league and indeed non-league teams. And actually, it's a real bonding point, I would think. And there's a comedians' football game in London every week where people will typically turn up in their respective lower league shirts. So you see a lot of passion on show. And I would say, actually, it's the ones who all support Arsenal or Liverpool or whatever who are probably obviously they get their big glory moments, but that's of less interest. It's really made me feel very grateful that I support and I hate to use this word, slightly niche team, because I think it's probably endeared me a bit more to the comedy football community than if I was still the same Man United idiot that I was when I was 7.
And sort of following on from that, have you done any gigs in Oxford, and have you ever been heckled for supporting Swindon?
I'm afraid I've not. I mean, I've gigged in Oxford probably more than almost anywhere else apart from London and Edinburgh, because that's where I started, and I did so many there when I was a student. But I have to say that I'm aware that I was a double agent behind enemy lines as a student at Oxford, and ultimately it didn't bring me too much trouble. I consider the Kassam business park, and I do consider it to be more a business park, as to be just a very grubby corner of South Oxford, largely removed from the idyllic sort of student world that I was such a cliched part of. And so I was able not to feel like I was really sort of causing too much friction, and I don't think any Oxford fans really cared that there was someone from a village of Aldbourne doing some pretty shoddy student stand-up comedy, and they certainly weren't going to give up an evening to go and heckle me about it.
Okay, and the final one we've got here from Pete is, if you ever win a BAFTA, will you wear a red Swindon Town suit as Kerry Mucklow did?
I will not carry it off with anywhere near the same class and finery of Kerry, which I think was one of the all-time great awards ceremony outfits, if not the great. But I think it would make less sense. I think she'd really, built up to the gag with some, with getting it in the show. So it would probably have to depend on whether it was part of any sort of running joke. But I think if it could be met with Kerry's approval, and I'd probably, run it by Daisy, Daisy May Cooper first, then it would be a delight to feel the wind blowing up my skirt as I came in a full Swindon sort of dress. It would be lovely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed, Ivo. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you both.
No, and those of us who have the red and white passion, you can't explain it. It's just there. We miss it deeply, and we want it back again as soon as possible, don't we?
It will be back. I can't tell you, the biggest takeaway from this for me has been the news of that 2012 versus 2020 Legends match. I am beside myself with excitement, and I will do my very best to exempt myself from any childcare duties on that historic day.
Ivo, thank you very much indeed. We'll let you go and look after your child right now. Thank you ever so much. Hannah, you got one or two little announcements to make. Thank you, Ivo, very much indeed.
Very much.
You got one or two announcements to make, I know, about Player of the Year, etc. So if you'd like to give us that information. Yep,
so first off, we'll start with a big thank you again to you, Vic, just for chairing all of these live on the sofa with events. It's very much appreciated. So yeah, just a reminder to all of our members that emails have gone out this week with your voting slips on for the Player of the Season awards. And we are looking to run a virtual event, obviously, because we won't have our presentation dinner this year. So maybe check your inboxes, check your junk folders, because I know sometimes they kind of end up in there, and just let us know your vote for the season. And then the other thing to mention is that we have got another special episode coming this Friday. So Dion Conroy will be joining us to take questions and kind of give us an overview of his career history. So look out for that one. And that will be advertised on social media from tomorrow.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. We should mention, of course, the Just Giving page for the Prospect Hospice. If you want to go along and have a look at that and donate to that wonderful cause, then please feel free to do so. Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. Thank you to everybody behind the scenes as well within the Supporters Club. The work is amazing. Thank you for all the work that you do. Both of us will be back on Friday. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.